Glorious Model O. To say that this iconic lightweight gaming mouse took the world by storm in 2019 would be an understatement. And it has, since then, put Glorious firmly in the map of the gaming peripherals industry, allowing it to not only expand its gaming mice lineup into different sizes, shapes, and even into the low-latency wireless segment, but also to kick the doors of the premium semi-custom mechanical keyboards market with their GMMK Pro and its blockbuster success in 2021. But as we all know, a lot has changed in the gaming mice market since the launch of the original Model O, to a point where simply being lightweight no longer warrants a special advantage to a gaming mouse, since the market has been flooded by lightweight options in every price segment, where even the undisputed giants in this segment, such as Logitech, Razer, and SteelSeries, eventually all came out with their answers to the lightweight gaming mice craze. Now, more than 3 years later, Glorious is coming out with the new version of the Model O, the Model O2, promising even better performance with a new body construction, new and improved sensor and switches, better battery life in the wireless version, a new Bluetooth low-energy connection mode, and a new trigger design, all while maintaining most of the original shape, a lightweight that made its predecessor famous. So in this video, we'll check out how the Model O2 fares against its previous versions, and more importantly, how does it stack up against the extremely competitive landscape of high-performance gaming mice in late 2022. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. Bring your next product to market with PCBWay's OEM and contract manufacturing services. Check the link in the description below for more information. Hello and welcome to IO Sam. I'm Sam Franco, and this is a channel where I do tech reviews and show you how to build, fix, and mod all sorts of computer gear. Today we are checking out the long-awaited sequel to Glorious' extremely popular ambidextrous Model O, the Model O2, in both its wired and wireless versions for $65 and $100 respectively. In this video we'll go through its specs and updated features, and then compare it with the existing competition currently available in the market. As usual, I'll break everything down into neatly organized chapters with progress bars on the bottom and top of the screen to help you navigate this video in case you want to jump to any specific chapter. As a disclaimer, Glorious has sent me pre-release versions of both the wired and wireless Model O2s for the sole purpose of this video review, but this is not a sponsored video in any way. As my usual viewers already know, my reviews are never dictated by manufacturers, resellers, or PR teams, and Glorious will only see this video for the first time after it is publicly available here in the channel, so you and everyone else gets to see it at the same time. I will place affiliate links in the video description for most products I'll show here, and those can generate revenue to support this channel with no additional cost to you. But that does not influence the views and opinions I'll give about any of the products I'll mention in this video. And finally, as the mice I tested were pre-production versions, there might be small differences between the units I tested here and the products that will ship in December. Now let's go through the Model O2 specifications, features, and overall quality. Starting with the new visual, I'd say it looks very different from the previous model at a quick first glance, before you realize that the most important part, the shape, has thankfully stayed basically the same. Then there is the new buttons design, which I'm sure will be quite polarizing, where a few of you will balk at the idea of smaller buttons with an island in the middle beneath the scroll wheel. But I have to admit that I'm totally sold on this design change. As we'll discuss on the buttons and switches segment, the feel of the right and left clicks are significantly better on the O2 than on its predecessor. While Glorious did not remove the Model O's trademark perforated shell, they did radically change the size and shape of the holes, which together with the other changes they did to the body, such as making it a single-layer structure now, instead of the more complex dual layer of the V1, looks much cleaner and a bit more elegant than the giant hexagons of the older model. The LED strips on both sides remained and got even brighter than before, but the light on the scroll wheel got axed. The new texture of the shell also has a striking effect on the way it looks, especially on the matte black copy I have here. You have the choice between matte black or matte white, but no glossy finish option here, as was already the case with the previous Model O wireless. One element that is conspicuously missing this time is Odin himself. While I know the long-haired, bearded dude plastered on the side was too tongue-in-cheek for the new brand identity that Glorious is moving towards, I can't help but miss him this time. It's almost like saying goodbye to a good old friend. The branding now is definitely cleaner and sleeker though, with the tiny new Odin silhouette under the DPI button and the Glorious logo with the mouse name on the left side, where right-handed users like me will never see. To use a car analogy, I'd say the overall look went from the sharp and aggressive looks of a Lamborghini to the smoother and more elegant lines of an Aston Martin. which I'm totally okay with. Then, moving on to arguably the most important aspect of a gaming mouse, the shape of the Model O2 is still one of my favorites for a hybrid use mouse that can be used for both gaming and productivity. While the O2 looks quite different at a first glance, its ambidextrous shape is still basically the same of the original Model O, which, in turn, was based on the Granddaddy FK line from Zowie, the mouse that inspired the vast majority of the ambidextrous gaming mice in the market today. When seen from the top, the outline is pretty much identical to the previous Model O, with the same 61mm in width in the front, 66mm in the rear, and 56mm in the middle taper. Although the O2 is slightly shorter in length, with 126mm versus 128 in the original. From the side, both share the same 12mm in height in the front, but the O2 is half millimeter taller in the highest part of the hump at 38 than the original's 37.5. The size differences are so small that I honestly couldn't tell, which is a good thing, since this shape and size is a perfect middle ground between a good gaming mouse and a good desktop/productivity one. You see, I do agree with a lot of other mouse reviewers out there when they say that a small, lightweight, ambidextrous mouse is usually better for FPS gaming, since the smaller the mouse, the easier it is to use it with either fingertip or claw grip. So in that sense, my original Model O- still is the best FPS gaming mouse I've ever tried for its price range. But I don't use computer mice just for gaming. I spend far more time on desktop chores, such as web browsing, typing on word processors and spreadsheets, or editing videos. And with my hand size, which is 18 centimeters in length by 9.5 centimeters across, I could not use the O- as a daily driver for those tasks, because it is just too small for me to use it with a palm grip when I'm not gaming. While I will always prefer an ergo mouse for productivity over an ambidextrous one if I have the choice, the regular size Model O is still a good compromise in terms of shape and size. I can still use it with a relaxed fingertip grip, although I have less range of motion on the Y-axis, since the longer body will hit the backside of my palm sooner than the O- would. At any rate, the Model O and now the O2 are still the best hybrid gaming/work mice I've ever used, since they are basically one of the very few ambidextrous mice that I can use for both gaming and productivity without cramping my hands at the end of the day. But of course, that is the opinion of someone with medium-sized hands. So for people with smaller hands, the upcoming O2-, which we all know is coming, would be naturally the better choice. And one final note on this chapter about the holes in the shell and how that affects the feel when gripping and using the mouse on a day-to-day basis. While it didn't bother me, I could feel the large hexagon cutouts of the V1 in my palm under my knuckles when using it. But on the O2, I can no longer feel its much smaller rounded cutouts. While I know this is a super personal thing, I just wanted to make my experience in this regard clear, which is why I can comfortably say I don't have an issue with any mice that has holes in its shell. But if you're sensitive to this kind of thing, then the O2, just like its predecessor, would obviously not be for you. On the weight department, Glorious went with what I consider a sensible decision, but one I know will be controversial to many of you. On the undisputed good news, they decided to improve the build quality and add more features to the wired O2, while significantly reducing its weight to 59 grams when compared to the original wired Model O's 67. On the more controversial side, they added even more features to the new wireless O2, but here they are keeping basically the same weight of the previous wireless Model O, which is a markedly different approach than the one Logitech and Razer took with their wireless mice, which was to kind of keep the same build quality, but then cut off features to significantly reduce the weight of their already lightweight mice even further. And I believe both approaches are valid, and I can totally see good arguments on both sides. Let's analyze the way Logitech and Razer went first. For the G Pro X Superlight, Logitech kept its renowned good quality shell without any holes, but to lower the weight from the regular G Pro's 80 grams to the Superlight's 63, they removed the right side buttons, the DPI switching button, and the RGB backlight. They also simplified some of the intricate support ridges the original G Pro had inside. For the Viper V2 Pro, Razer thinned out its shell while still keeping it without holes, but to lower the weight from the ultimate 74 grams to the V2 Pro's 58, they also removed the right side buttons, the internal memory used to save presets, also shed RGB lights, deleted the rubber grip coating on the sides, and removed the super useful pogo pins at the bottom that allowed you to charge the mouse without having to plug a cable. By removing the RGB lights, both companies also managed to slightly improve their battery life, which went from 60 to 70 hours on the G Pro X Superlight and from 70 to 80 hours on the Viper V2 Pro. From an FPS gaming-only perspective, are those decisions justifiable? Sure. They realized that there was an arms race in the gaming mice market to see who could make the lightest gaming mouse possible, and they just went for it. All good. And we can all agree that Glory is coming out with a new wired Model O that is almost 10 grams lighter, while significantly improving the build quality, updating its specs, and adding more features was an incredibly nice move. But now, let's analyze the way Glory has decided to go with their new wireless O2. First, while still keeping holes in the shell, they decided to significantly improve the structural strength by making the walls thicker, improving and strengthening the button's hinges, and improving the texture for better grip. Second, they not only decided to keep the RGB, but also made it brighter both outside and inside of the body, which you'll be able to see it better through the holes in the shell. Third, they not only increased the rated battery life from 70 to 110 hours without RGB, but they also added a Bluetooth Low Energy radio on top of the existing 2.4 GHz connection, which should extend the battery life even further to a claimed 210 hours, also with RGB off. This all sounds great, right? So what's the catch? Well, if you were already happy with the 69 grams of the O wireless, there's no catch. The new O2 wireless actually even lost 1 gram to 68 now. Glorious also says both versions of the O2 had their internal parts slightly repositioned to concentrate its center of mass right on top of the sensor to improve its balance, although I never had any issues with the original O wireless in that regard anyway. Keeping the weight while adding more features was achieved mostly by thinning out the PCB and changing the plastic structure of the shell, that while it has thicker walls, now has only a single layer instead of the dual layer of the previous version. But if you're expecting a weight loss in this new generation, well, there's your catch. Now, I'm obviously not going to tell you which way you should go. If ultra low weight is your #1 priority on a wireless gaming mouse, then it would be fair to say that the medium-sized Model O2 wireless is probably not for you, since there are no shortage of stripped-down wireless gaming mice out there around 60 grams or lighter. For those users, Glorious itself has also been experimenting with stripped-down ultralight wireless mice, such as their Model O Pro and Model D Pro, which they ran through their Group by Skunkworks Glorious Forge brand, and which we'll discuss later. But for everyone else who don't like group buys, I hear you, then Razer and Logitech definitely have ultralight gaming mice ready to sell you, for a price of course, but we'll also get to that part in a bit. As I mentioned before, on the O2, Glorious decided to significantly improve the structural strength of the top and bottom shell. While the original wired Model O had a pretty decent body in terms of rigidity for its weight, it was not uncommon for people to complain that it creaked or that you could press the side buttons just by death gripping the mouse on the sides. So on the Model O wireless released in 2020, Glorious went ahead and improved the rigidity of the shell to fix those complaints with pretty good results overall. But now on the O2, while they still kept the holes, that are now rounded and much smaller than the hexagons from the previous versions, they redesigned the shell with a single layer, but with much thicker walls. To a point where I can say without any hesitation that this mouse now has a stronger body than both Logitech G Pro Superlight and definitely stronger than the Razer Viper V2 Pro. The other very much welcome change in the O2 is now the texture of its top shell. This is, together with the new Bluetooth radio and the new buttons design we'll discuss later, my favorite feature of this new mouse. It feels absolutely incredible in the hand. Grippy like rubber, but unlike the old style rubber coating from computer peripherals of a decade ago, this one does not feel sticky and gummy. Even with sweaty hands, it was still firmly attached to my fingers at all times. The overall build quality here is exceptional, and you can feel it in your hands the moment you get it out of the box. No squeaks, no creaks, no rattles, just super solid. The feet of the O2 is the same 100% PTFE thin G-skates we all know from the previous model, so they are perfectly interchangeable, which is great. They're very smooth on my X-Ray Pad Thor, and while small, they are still on par with the skates of the Viper V2 Pro, and even a bit smoother than the huge pads of the Superlight. But it would be nice if Glorious could add the optional 2 extra large skates to place in the middle of the mouse, such as they did with the Model D wireless I'm showing here. The PCB was the area where they saved the most weight on the O2, by making it thinner than that of the original. But since the PCB doesn't really affect the structure of the mouse, it was a rather smart decision to shave off a few grams here. The other thing Glorious did here was redesigning the PCB and the location of the larger components to concentrate most of the weight right above the sensor. And at this point in 2022, I think we can all agree that having a partially exposed PCB by perforated shells should no longer be a concern to the vast majority of users, right? I mean, after millions of mice from so many different brands sold in the last few years with this element in common, I think that if exposed PCBs were a real long-term quality concern, most mice manufacturers would have dropped this design already. While having good hygiene with your computer peripherals, such as keeping the Cheeto dust away from your desk, still beats any other factor in keeping them working for longer, PCB and IC manufacturing has evolved so much in the last few decades that these devices have become incredibly resilient to moisture, dust, and even physical and mechanical abuse. And while I know most people probably don't care, I still find something oddly appealing in having a view of some PC peripherals innards, when they are designed tastefully. If you are an entrepreneur in the market for a reliable OEM or contract manufacturing partner to help you bring your next product design to life, did you know PCBWay has exactly what you're looking for? If you have a design for lighting, security or medical equipment, home or kitchen appliances, or other types of electronics, PCBWay can manufacture your product under your specifications and help you to bring your creations to market quicker and with higher quality. All while enjoying the flexibility and cost savings that are only possible through OEM economies of scale in PCB production and assembly, injection molding, CNC machining, and sheet metal fabrication. With 11 factories and over 2,800 employees, as well as access to the best component suppliers in the industry, PCBWay is a uniquely qualified one-stop shop that can assist you through the entire process of designing, manufacturing, testing, and packing fully assembled devices that are ready for shipment. Check out the link in the description below for more information and OEM case studies, or to contact PCBWay's team of engineers, designers, and production specialists for a quote. And huge thanks to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. Both versions of the O2 now come with glorious new BAMF 2.0 sensor with much improved specs when compared to the original model O wireless and its BAMF 1.0. Like its predecessor, the O2 also features the same range of 1 to 2 mm liftoff distance and debounce time range of 0 to 16 milliseconds. Both adjustable through the Glorious Core app, as it is its resolution that can go from 100 to 26,000 dpi. The BAMF 2.0 is based on Pixart's 3395 chip, while the previous BAMF 1.0 of the original model O wireless was based on the 3370, and the original wired O had a 3360. In terms of tracking performance, I doubt anyone could ever tell the difference between these sensors anyway, since the 3370 still offers top-of-the-line performance to this day. But the main advantage of the 3395 is in power consumption and the resulting battery life improvement on the wireless model. Although one other claimed advantage of the latest sensor is Pixart's motion sync technology that better synchronizes the signals generated by the mouse sensor with the signal collection frequency of your PC, which is supposed to improve tracking performance at a small penalty of 1 millisecond motion delay, which shouldn't be noticeable during gameplay. At any rate, Glorious informed me that both the wired and wireless O2s will get a firmware update after launch that will allow you to turn this feature on and off, which is nice. The max polling rate of the O2 is 1 kHz, which is still the industry's standard despite some inroads into 4 and even 8 kHz by both Razer and Corsair. While most esports titles today seem to already support such high polling rates, it would be up to you to bring a fairly beefy CPU that can sustain such rates without stuttering and dropping frames. So while these new crazy high rates would be a nice to have, its implementation at this point are still a bit flaky. The other issue of high polling rates on wireless mice is the big impact in battery life, which makes it, at least for now, more suitable to wired mice. Not to mention that the newer wireless Razer mice that support higher polling rates require an additional $30 dongle when bought separately. So at this moment in 2022, it feels like anything higher than 1 kHz is still firmly in the early adopters realm. The switches used here are manufactured by Kale, specifically for Glorious, and are rated for 80 million clicks, which is the same one Glorious already used in their recently shipped Model O Pro, and which feels super crisp. They feel much better than the 20mm ohms that Glorious had on the original wired and wireless Model O's, and have the typical Kale sharpness a lot of mice enthusiasts seem to like. In terms of side play, my V1 Model O wireless had very little, and the new O2 keeps the same tradition here. These switches, with the newly designed left and right triggers, bring one of the biggest advantages of this mouse when compared to the original Model O in my opinion: a dramatic reduction in pre- and post-travel on both right and left clicks. The new O2 has less pre-travel than both the Superlight and the Viper V2 Pro, while matching those in the amount of post-travel. The design of the new buttons is also the main visual difference between the new and the old versions. While the V1 had overhanging buttons, the V2 now has the buttons tucked into the shell. The finger grooves are also slightly deeper, which helps to better hone your fingers into the optimum center position on the buttons. In my testing, the first thing I noticed with this new design is that now I no longer feel the occasional pinch I would get on the tip of my ring finger on the original Model O, since I tend to rest it right on the edge of the right button. On the side buttons, I couldn't notice any meaningful difference from the pretty good ones from the previous Model O wireless though, since both have one of switches in them. The position is exactly the same, and so is the click feel, as well as the amount of pre- and post-travel. When compared to the Superlight and the Viper V2 Pro, I find the clicks, pre- and post-travel of the side buttons of the O2 basically equivalent to the Viper and a bit better than the Superlight. But the differences are mostly on the positioning though, which the Model O has the front side button ever so slightly more forward than on the Viper and the Superlight. And finally, the scroll wheel, despite having a new encoder, feels pretty similar to the one on the original Model O, with rubberized notches, same height profile with no side tilting, well-defined but less sharp bumps than what you get on the Viper V2 and the Superlight. It is more pronounced than what you get on the Viper V2 Pro, but a little less than what you get on the G Pro X Superlight. Considering I never had any squeaks or issues with the wheel encoder of both my wired and wireless Model Os after more than 2 years of use, which is not something I can say about my Razer Basilisk, for example, which had to be replaced twice under warranty already for issues with its wheel, I'm pretty confident in the quality of the scroll wheel of the new O2. So let's now take a listen to the O2's clicks and a comparison with the Viper V2 Pro and the G Pro X Superlight. Like the original Model O before, the O2 comes in both wired-only or wireless versions, where the wireless can be used both wired with the detachable USB-C cable, or wireless with a low-latency 2.4 GHz dongle. Considering where we are today with the wireless performance of top-tier gaming mice, I don't think we need to spend any time explaining that the latency you get with a good 2.4 GHz connection nowadays is on par with that of a good old USB-C cable, right? Suffice to say that the original Model O wireless had a fantastic track record in regards to the quality of its low latency connection, and the O2 is no different in that regard. As long as you don't mind plugging it in every once in a while to recharge it, which you can do while still using the mouse in wired mode, the wireless model would be the obvious choice in terms of convenience and quality of life, if you can shell out the not insignificant $35 price difference over the wired model. But for those $35 extra, you also get one other big new feature of the O2 wireless, which is the one I was most excited about: the addition of a Bluetooth 5.2 low-energy radio alongside the existing 2.4 GHz connection. Now, the O2 wireless becomes a fully versatile work-and-play mouse, since Bluetooth is essential for mobile setups such as mine, which until now consisted of either a Razer Orochi V2 or a Death Adder V2 Pro to go along with my Razer Blade 14 and a low-profile KeyMove K68 mechanical keyboard. Which, if you look closely, all of those peripherals have one thing in common: Bluetooth. Why? Convenience and battery life. While we all know that the polling rate in Bluetooth mode is very low, we don't really need the same level of tracking accuracy when doing regular desktop work. And the fact I don't have to plug any dongles is a huge plus when working on a laptop. If you switch to Bluetooth for that type of use and then only switch back to the 2.4 GHz dongle when gaming, you extend the battery life of your mice and keyboard by a lot, as we'll discuss in the battery life chapter. On the RGB lighting department, while Glorious did remove the LEDs from the scroll wheel, they not only kept it in the outside body, but they also made it brighter both inside and out, which you'll be able to see it better through the unobstructed holes on the new shell. As for lighting schemes and options, you have the same ones from the V1, which you can configure in the Car app. And, interestingly enough, you still can change them using the same button combos of the V1 on the mouse itself without needing to use the software. If you don't want to use Glorious Core with this mouse, nothing stops you from personalizing the RGB lights. While RGB is not important to everybody, it seems it is still very important to a significant chunk of gamers out there. So, good guy Glorious, who has RGB lights as an integral part of its brand image since its inception, decided that this was important enough to a significant part of its target market to keep it on the Model O2. Now, I know that having these LED strips there do affect the weight, and this harks back to the previous discussion of features versus weight, which will be a factor for users when choosing between the O2 and some of its more bare-bone lightweight competitors out there. Obviously, if you have the RGB lights blasting with max brightness, that will reduce the battery life of the wireless Model O2 significantly, which was already the case with the original Model O wireless. In my testing, the O2 wireless battery lasted considerably longer than the original O wireless, especially if used with a more subdued single warm color at around 30% brightness as I'm showing here. With this type of light configuration, my O2 wireless battery lasted about 2 days of work and light gaming without turning the mouse off when I was away from my desk, which was surprisingly good. And speaking of battery life, that has been possibly the biggest improvement in the new O2 wireless when compared to the previous version. While the battery life of the V1 was rated for 70 hours with RGB off, which was not too different from most of the competition, with the RGB lights on, you'd get a drastic reduction to a point where the battery would barely last one working day. Which is no longer the case, as I mentioned on the previous chapter. The O2 wireless is rated for 110 hours on the 2.4 GHz connection and up to a whopping 210 hours on Bluetooth with the RGB lights off. And without RGB, I can confirm that the O2 wireless will definitely outlast the Superlight and the Razer V2 Pro by a lot. Now, that's where the new Bluetooth low energy connection I mentioned before comes into play here and can make a massive difference. Since we don't need extreme tracking accuracy when doing regular desktop work, switching between Bluetooth for work and 2.4 GHz for gaming is the real big brain move here. And that's when you see the O2 wireless crushing the competition in the battery life department. To check the battery life, you either look at the indicator in the Core app software, or you could assign a battery check function to a side or DPI button that will light up the RGB strip in red, orange, yellow, or green to indicate the battery status. In the O2 wired box, you get the mouse in a pretty nice and secure packaging with your usual assortment of documentation. In the O2 wireless box, you get a very similar experience from the V1 Model O wireless. You get the mouse, documentation, the detachable cable, the Glorious branded USB-A dongle, and the little rubberized extender doohickey to have the wireless dongle closer to your desk for better signal, in case your PC is too far out. The cable on both the wired and the wireless O2s are the same 2 meters long ascended cable from the previous models, which has been one of the high points of Glorious mice for some time now. It's super light and flexible, and it has the same slight upward angle on the stress relief that the other recent Glorious mice have. The wireless O2 carries the same ability of the original, of being perfectly usable as a wired mouse while charging, since we're not talking about Apple mice here. Like the original Model O wireless and unlike the original wired, the O2 in both its versions is fully compatible with the Glorious Core app. So if you're using any of Glorious products for the last year or so, you already know what to expect here. Now, driver software for peripheral companies is one of those perennial pain points, right? Just go on Reddit any day of the week and you'll see endless rants about how bad Razer Synapse, Logitech G Hub, and basically every other peripheral company's software is. And for all the crap we all love to give Logitech for G Hub and how long it took for them to finally get their shit together, which I have to say they mostly have since earlier this year, or Razer for how much resources it consumes in our PCs when running on the background.
So I'm greeted with this install screen to install Synapse, but wait, what's this? Alexa? There was all this other rubbish here. Chroma Connect, Chroma Studio, Chroma Viz, and Hue? What the is Hue? And Nano light panels? What is all this? See, when I stumble into like this, I didn't even want to install anything anymore. Look at this, it wants to download over 400 meg and what, 8 programs? Get away from me, man. I'm not playing this game. You can right off.
It's okay, Thomas. We've all been there. With Glorious, the situation is not exactly rosy either. I mean, the usability of the software is not too bad, since it is not that difficult to navigate and find the configurations you're looking for. And the way they lay out all your Glorious gear is also pretty intuitive. But the interface can be laggy, the macros recording feature is a bit confusing to use, and there are still quite a few features lacking in the way you can configure their keyboard's layers, for example. But the main issue I have with it, though, is that unlike Logitech's G Hub, and just like with Razer Synapse, their software is quite a memory hog when running in the background. And it suffers from some weird instabilities the more Glorious gear I have connected to my PC. Sometimes it will just crash and shut itself off, or worse, it might develop a bizarre memory leak that will suck all the available RAM on my system into a black hole to a point where it will completely crash my machine. I have reported these issues to Glorious, and they at least keep a transparent bug tracking and features request list on their site. So at least we know they know what we want them to fix or to change in the app, which is definitely a nice policy. Besides, they have announced earlier this year they are working on a completely revamped Core 2.0 app, which is supposed to address a lot of the community's complaints on the current version. Glorious offers a 2 years warranty on their entire line of gaming mice, and they now offer an additional year if you register your product directly with them after purchase, taking it to an industry-leading 3 years warranty, which is more than Logitech and Razer offer today. As someone who has tried their customer support before I ever had any relationship with them through this channel, I can attest that at least in the US, their warranty service is top-notch. Now, let's talk about the really important stuff here. How does the O2 wired and wireless versions perform for desktop day-to-day tasks, productivity, and more importantly, for gaming? I'll start with a quick take on the topic of using the Model O2 for productivity. While it's pretty obvious that an ambidextrous gaming mouse such as this was not exactly designed for productivity, it is also obvious that most people paying between $65 and $100 for a premium gaming mouse will probably also use that same mouse for other things that are not game related. As I mentioned in the shape and measurements chapter, I do believe the Model O2, just like its predecessor, can be comfortably used for desktop chores and productivity work by the vast majority of people with average-sized hands. Although unfortunately, left-handed folks were completely left out here, since the Model O2, like the original O, does not offer buttons on the right side. Which, to be fair, neither do the G Pro X Superlight and the new Viper V2 Pro, which have also axed the right side buttons of their previous versions. Left-handed folks would have to get either the original G Pro Wireless or the Viper V1 Ultimate, since you can still buy those and they still have side buttons on both sides. While an ambidextrous mouse such as the O2 will not offer you the same level of comfort than even other gaming mice that have a right-handed ergonomic shape, as well as more programmable buttons, such as the Logitech G502, the Razer Basilisk, and even Glorious' own Model I believe that as long as you can use the O2 with a palm or relaxed fingertip grip, you should be able to use it with applications that require intense mouse use, without cramping your hand after a full day of work. Glorious doesn't offer a large or extra large size of the Model O2 like Zowie does with its FK1 Plus, for example. So if you happen to have very large hands, maybe the O2 might be too small for you to use with a palm grip. But for everyone else with average-sized hands, this shape and size should work just fine. The fact the O2 has programmable buttons and accepts up to 3 different profiles means it could be used in situations where you might need a couple of easy-to-access macros that you could assign to the side buttons, for example. Now, the only reason to use this ambidextrous mouse for productivity in the first place would be if you will also use it for gaming, of course. If you are what I call a casual first-person shooter gamer, who besides using your computer for school and work, also plays AAA FPS titles on the side, then the Model O could be the perfect mouse for you. Since this is first and foremost a no-compromises gaming mouse, the O2 for its very competitive price when compared to the options from the other larger peripheral makers out there, is one of the best options in the market for you in terms of performance, features, and value. While I have a large collection of mice in all shapes, sizes, and weights, I will usually go for an ergo-shaped mouse for work or even for RTS and third-person games, and then go for a lightweight ambidextrous mouse just for FPS games. But if I had to pick just one Swiss Army knife kind of mouse to use for everything, the Model O2 would be my first pick. It just feels right in my hands, and the new texture gives it a fantastic grip, while also being extremely comfortable to use on the sweaty days of summer. While the O2 wireless is indeed a few grams heavier than the G Pro X Superlight or the Viper V2 Pro, I'm of the opinion that the whole weight reduction effort by this industry is one of those endeavors with diminishing returns. Reducing gaming mice weight from the usual 80 or 90 grams from a few years back to 68 grams made a huge difference when the original Model O came out. But I feel like the reduction from high 60s to high 50s does not yield the same linear gain in gaming performance or ergonomic comfort, especially in single-player FPS games where weight is definitely a factor, but not the only one to determine performance and comfort, since the pacing is obviously much less frantic than on the esports and the online competitive scene. Which is why I wanted to hear the opinion of a competitive FPS player and preferably someone who has been doing it for a while. So I turned to my buddy Blaze, who has been head shooting since the days of Half-Life multiplayer competitions. I know he has been using much more expensive and difficult to get final mouse gear regularly in his Twitch channel for quite a while now, so I figured it would be interesting to hear what he had to say of the regular sized O2 that will retail for a fraction of what you'd pay for one of those Starlights these days. So I dropped 2 prototypes of the O2 at his place to have him do a quick test of both the wired and the wireless versions during one of his streams. Blaze has played a lot of CSGO in the past, and nowadays you can find him playing the survival multiplayer game Rust in his Blaze the Way Twitch channel. Alright, take it away, Blaze.
That's a good looking table, ain't it? What's up, guys? My name is Blaze the Way, and I'm here to give you my thoughts on the new Glorious Model O2. Disclaimer, I am not a Glorious mouse user. I am a Final Mouse Starlight 12 user. I own 4 of them. And the reason why is because the shape and the weight suit my hand size and fingertip grip better. No other reason. But the wired and wireless versions of the Model O2 are not exactly slouches when it comes to gaming. And in fact, I think that Glorious might have sold themselves a bit short when it comes to marketing these. And you might ask why? Well, some of their mice have Pro in the name. They go out of their way to specify in their marketing material that this mouse might be for the more casual player. It's not the Pro version. But let me tell you something. If you put in enough hours and you get the right mouse for your hand size and you have a modern sensor, you can be a pro, regardless of whether or not the box of the mouse says Pro on it. And even though both mice weren't exactly as light as I would like them to be, my aim was still very stable on both. And I wouldn't know the difference really unless I had used something that was lighter and better suited to my hand. I used a palm grip, and this mouse is perfect for palm grip. I honestly kind of preferred the wireless version. I think Glorious did a very good job with both of these. I only have a few recommendations that I would make. The first recommendation I would make to Glorious is to make the mouse feet a little more round, a little bigger on the bottom. I do like that Glorious put them on the very edges of the bottom of the mouse, but I just wish that they were a little bit bigger and had a little bit more thickness, that's all. I would also prefer if the scroll wheel was slightly recessed into the mouse and the steps were just a little bit lighter, but they're crisp and they feel good, so I can't fault them too much. Can I nitpick certain things with these mice? Sure I can, but I could honestly do that with any product, and I think that Glorious has a winning formula here. I would honestly love to see a Model O2 Pro or see Glorious experiment with different types of materials. But we're not there yet. For now, I enjoyed my time with these and I'm glad that I got the chance to do this. I think the mouse will do well, and for the industry's sake, to breed more innovation, I hope it does.
And there you have it. I had a lot of fun watching his stream when he was testing the O2s in Rust, and let me publicly thank Blaze here for his insights and for moments like this.
Oh, a guy on top. Hit him.
Oh!
He's dead! Did you hit him too?
Yeah. You got a DB for us?
So, if you have a few hours for some quality entertainment, you should definitely join him in his Twitch channel, that I'll leave a link in the description below, where you get to see some hilarious Rust raids with him and his team. Now, the most important question is this. Is the price of the O2 right for what you get? As mentioned in the beginning, Glorious is releasing the O2 wired for $64.99 and the O2 wireless for $99.99. And I know that the first thing a lot of people will immediately point out is the fact that Glorious raised the price for both versions of the O2 when compared to the launch price of $49.99 of the original wired Model O and $79.99 for the O wireless. And you'd be right. But then we cannot forget that the original Model O came out in 2019, and the following Model O wireless was released in 2020. And that those prices were already insanely competitive for what you got back then. But unless you've been living under a rock in the last couple of years, you know that a lot of things have been happening in the world and in the economy that has caused prices for everything from food and gasoline to electronic components to skyrocket. So yeah, considering the status quo of the world we're living in late 2022, and considering all the improvements that Glorious brought to the table in the new Model O2, their price increase is actually not that bad. Especially when you consider that its main competitors, the Logitech G Pro X Superlight and the Razer Viper V2 Pro, have MSRPs of $160 and $150 respectively. And even if you get them at a 10 or 15% discount, they'll still be more expensive than the O2 wireless in its full price. While I know that Glorious has been taking a lot of crap from certain corners of the enthusiast PC peripherals market for its efforts to enter more premium segments of this industry, with its premium line of GMMK Pro keyboards and Glorious Forge mice, I honestly think that Glorious is still staying true to its industry disruptive roots when they continue to undercut the prices of the larger and better established players in the gaming peripherals industry. So as long as Glorious continues to offer more value than those big boys, with its mainstream mice and keyboard lines, I don't have any problem to see them also trying to enter more profitable peripherals market with their other more premium line of products. Hey, I don't mind them selling expensive Lexus as long as they don't stop selling the more affordable Toyotas. Hopefully, by having better overall profit margins in those premium segments, they can channel some of those profits into research and development that will also improve their more budget offerings. You can count on me to keep an eye on it. Alright, so what are my conclusions about the Glorious new Model O2 line of lightweight gaming mice? My goal with this review was to verify basically 5 things: the O2's specs and features, its quality and support, its performance, its value for money, and what does the competition looks like in all these areas. In terms of specs and features, I'd say this is an easy win for Glorious. The new O2 not only surpasses the original O's in every possible way, but this package also beats pretty much everything else the competition has to offer today, and we're not even talking about price yet. You get top-notch sensor, switches, connectivity, construction, and battery life. Not to mention comfort with its new awesome texture, programmability, without the need to have software running in the background at all times, and looks if you enjoy a nice RGB light show. All that while cutting the weight of the wired version by almost 10 grams and keeping the already lightweight of the wireless when compared to their predecessors. The only thing I can think of as something I wished Glorious had here, other than a smaller version of the mouse itself that is likely coming next year, would be optical switches, which have no debounce issues. Now, do you hear that? Yep. Is the elephant in the room. What about Glorious Forge line of Group Buy Only Pro mice, you ask? The Model O and D and Series 1 Pro, they sold a few months back, and which they recently started to ship the O Pro, as you might have seen in some reviews out there. I think it's fair to ask if it was okay for Glorious to charge the same $100 for the O Pro that doesn't have many of the features of the new O2. But as someone who has been using the O Pro for a few weeks now, I have the feeling the Forge Pro line of mice have a different target market in mind. While the O2 is more of a Swiss Army knife type of mouse that tries to be the best of all worlds to the largest possible audience, I think the O Pro is more targeted at people who are only concerned with one thing: weight. At 56 grams in my scale, the Model O Pro is the lightest gaming mouse I've ever tried, beating even the Razer Viper V2 Pro at 58, and it is indeed even more awesome for esports and competitive gaming only applications. But, just like with the Viper V2 Pro, it is a much more bare-bones experience than the O2, since while it doesn't have a perforated shell, it also doesn't offer RGB lights. So I don't think the O2 and the O Pro were designed for the same target market. And being a group buy only product, it was never meant to be a widely available option or even a super price competitive one to begin with. I see Glorious Forge line of mice more like some sort of fan service they are doing for its Glorious Forum community, and it is not something for everybody. Now, having said that, I'd be surprised if Glorious doesn't eventually bring an in-stock Pro version of the Model O, as well as their upcoming O2-, D2, and D2- in the near future, of course. But when asked about it, Glorious would obviously not comment on any product they haven't launched yet. On the quality front, we all know Glorious had its struggles during their quite humble beginnings. They had problems with cables being damaged by their packaging and a few consistency issues in the first iterations of the Model O and Model D. But I think history is on their side on most of these issues, since their efforts to shore up their QC and doing the best to offer top-notch customer support have been paying off since then. Both things that I have experienced myself in the last 3 years and can attest to both their products' improvement and the quality of their customer service. I have been around this industry long enough to have tried the customer support services of all the big players. And to be fair, Logitech and Razer have never let me down on their warranties either. But now I can say that Glorious has reached parity with them on that regard. And after trying every iteration of Glorious gaming mice since the original Model O in 2019, I can say without any hesitation that the O2 pre-production units I had the chance to test here had the best build quality of any mice they've put out so far. And they have not only also reached parity with the big players in this area, but I believe they have even surpassed those in many cases. On the performance theme, it is fair to say Glorious has been playing on the top league for quite some time now. It is easy to see this is a company created by gamers, and the gaming DNA really shows in their product's performance. And as the guys that made lightweight gaming mice popular, accessible, and affordable, Glorious is clearly continuing that tradition here with the new O2. And as someone who has been extensively testing the main players in this segment for a few months now, it is my opinion that the level of performance you get with the O2 is in the same level of what you get from the G Pro X Superlight and the Viper V2 Pro, for example, and definitely beats that of all other models from previous years, such as the original O Wireless, the original G Pro Wireless, and the original Viper Ultimate. So the discussion here will narrow down to things like which shape you like better, which weight works best for you, and how important are the feature sets of each competitor to you. For shape, only you can decide which one works for you and which one does not, of course. If you like the larger egg shape of the G Pro, the low hump of the Viper V2, or the more balanced dimensions of the O2. And then there is also your preferences in regards to the presence of holes in the shell, weight, and structural strength. But as Blaze and I were talking during our testing of the O2, it is just incredible how spoiled we've become with gaming mice in the last 3 years. Choosing between any of these mice would be like choosing which super sports car you prefer to go around the Nürburgring with. While you might be a few milliseconds faster in one or another, no matter which one you drove though, it would still be a hell of a fun ride. It is just incredible the amount of options we have today in almost every price point of the gaming mice market. And I think it is fair to credit Glorious for playing a big part in helping to shape this industry to where it is today. As we all know though, while performance is obviously essential, we can't lose sight of the good old cost-benefit ratio, right? And this is the other area where I think Glorious still shines. As the brand that practically redrew the lines of this industry in 2019 with the original Model O, the lightweight mouse that undercut practically every other player in the market at the time, it seems they're still determined to keep the value crown with the new O2. At $65 for the wired, it is still cheaper than most of the latest models from the competition, such as the wired Viper and the SteelSeries Aerox 5 at $80, or the Xtrfy MZ1 and the G-Wolves HDM Hottie for $70. The Xtrfy M42 is the closest competitor at the same $65. On the wireless side, the O2 Wireless at $100 easily beats in price the G Pro X Superlight at $160, the Razer Viper V2 Pro at $150, the SteelSeries Aerox 5 at $140, the XtraFi MZ1 Wireless at $120, and the G-Wolves Hadi HDS Ace at $109. Here, again, the XtraFi M42 Wireless is the closest competitor at the same $100. Now, prices fluctuate all the time, of course, depending on what's on sale at any given day. And as I said before, it would be hard to go wrong with any of these choices, really. These are all big league players. And even then, when you look at all the specs and features across the market, the O2 seems firmly on top of the best bang for your buck category, which is exactly where we always expected Glorious to be, since they came out with the original Model O in 2019. Alright, my friends, any questions or comments? Just leave them below or on my IOSM subreddit, and I'll be happy to answer. As usual, links for absolutely everything I showed here are in the description below. Meanwhile, if you want to check out my latest review of the Zenest Element 75 XT and its super nice layout, click here. Or click here to see my recent review of Glorious new wireless programmable numpad. Thanks for watching and see you all soon.